This presentation explores themes of death and folklore that some may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What if the sound of your own death wasn't the squeal of tires or the sudden silence of a stopped heart? What if it was a woman's scream carried on the wind, a sound woven from grief and despair, meant only for you? There is a legend, an ancient terror, of a sound that once heard guarantees that you or a member of your family will die within days, sometimes even hours. It's not a myth whispered by children in the dark. For centuries, entire bloodlines have sworn by its deadly accuracy, a prophecy delivered not in words, but in a single soul-shattering wail. They call her the being sídhe, the woman of the fairy mound, but in the modern world, she is known by a much more chilling name, the Banshee. But she is not what you think she is. The Banshee is not a monster that hunts in the night. She doesn't carry a weapon. She doesn't stalk you through the woods. In fact, she will never lay a hand on you. The terror of the Banshee is far more intimate, far more profound. She doesn't cause death. She simply announces it. She is a harbinger, a supernatural messenger whose only purpose is to warn a family that one of its own is about to be taken. She is a spectral mourner, a keener from the other world, and her grief precedes your own. But this supernatural courtesy is not extended to everyone. She doesn't cry for just anyone. She appears only to a select few, the ancient families of Ireland, those with the oldest and purest Gaelic blood. Which raises the most terrifying question of all. What happens when those families leave Ireland? When they cross an ocean and build new lives in a new world? Does the Banshee, a spirit tied to the land, stay behind? Or does the screaming follow the blood? To understand this phantom, we have to peel back the layers of modern horror and look into the heart of ancient Ireland, a land steeped in a belief system that blurred the lines between the living and the dead. The concept of the Banshee didn't spring from nothing. It evolved from a tradition that was very, very real, the practice of keening. In old Ireland, when a person died, their family would hire professional mourners, women known as keeners. These women were masters of grief. Their job was to perform the ceoined, a sorrowful lament that praised the dead, recounted their deeds, and guided their soul into the afterlife. It was a powerful, haunting, and deeply respected ritual. The keeners were seen as conduits, standing on the threshold between worlds. Now imagine a being that performs this same sacred duty, but not for the dead, for the dying. A spirit from the fairy world, the sídhe, who becomes so attached to a particular family that she takes it upon herself to be their personal, eternal mourner. This is the origin of the Banshee. She wasn't born of malice, but of a strange and supernatural loyalty. She is the family's spiritual guardian, their spectral matron, whose love for them is so strong that she weeps for their passing before it even happens. Each great Gaelic family was said to have its own Banshee. The O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the Kavanaghs, the MacDonalds. If your surname begins with an O or a Mac, tradition holds that your ancestors had a personal harbinger of death watching over them. She was a part of the family's legacy, a supernatural heirloom passed down through generations. Her cry was both a curse and a sign of noble heritage. To hear the Banshee was to know your bloodline was ancient and worthy of a warning from the otherworld itself. But what does one actually hear? Survivors, those who have heard the wail and lost a loved one soon after, struggle to describe it. It is a sound that defies simple explanation. It is not merely a human scream. It is said to be a fusion of a dozen agonizing sounds at once. It's the wail of a grieving woman, the shriek of a night bird, the howl of a lone wolf, and the rustling of 1,000 dead leaves, all woven together into a single piercing cry that chills the bone and stops the heart. Some say it sounds like nails scraping down a chalkboard inside your own skull. Others describe it as the sound of the wind being torn apart. It can be a low, mournful sobbing heard just outside a window, or a high-pitched, frantic shrieking that seems to come from all directions at once, echoing across the hills and fields. But no matter the form it takes, the effect is always the same. It is a sound of pure, undiluted loss. It is the sound of grief itself given a voice, and it promises that you are about to feel that same grief very, very soon. And what of the woman herself? Seeing the Banshee is far rarer than hearing her, and perhaps more terrifying. Her appearance is not fixed. She is a shapeshifter, her form often reflecting the age of the person who is about to die. She might appear as a beautiful young maiden with long, flowing hair the color of blood or silver, her eyes red and swollen from eternal weeping. This form is often seen washing a bloodstained shroud in a river or stream, the burial clothes of the one who is marked for death. Or she may take the form of a stately, dignified matron, dressed in a gray, hooded cloak or a green gown, her face pale and sorrowful. But her most famous and most feared form is that of the crone, a stooped ancient hag with a face carved with wrinkles of sorrow, long skeletal fingers, and a single tooth in her mouth. Her silver hair is wild and unkempt, and she glides rather than walks, a terrifying specter of impending doom. In every form, however, three things remain constant: her pale skin, her long flowing hair, and her eyes, which are always described as blazing red from centuries of crying for the family she is bound to protect. This bond, this ancient pact between spirit and bloodline, is the key. But it was a pact forged in the green hills of Ireland. So what happened when that blood was spilled across the globe? In the mid-19th century, the Great Famine ravaged Ireland. Millions died and millions more fled, desperate for a new life. They boarded coffin ships bound for America, Canada, and Australia, carrying with them little more than the clothes on their backs and the stories in their hearts. They brought their faith, their music, their culture, and their ghosts. The question that has haunted generations of Irish Americans is a chilling one. When the O'Briens and the Kavanaghs left County Cork and County Wexford for Boston and New York, did their Banshee follow? Could a spirit so intrinsically tied to the Irish soil cross the vast Atlantic Ocean? The answer, according to countless terrifying accounts, is yes. Stories began to surface from the tenements of Chicago to the farmlands of the Midwest. A family would be settling into their new American life, only to be awoken in the dead of night by a familiar, dreaded sound. A wail from the old country, a sound that had no place in the bustling streets of a new nation. The scream had followed the blood. The Banshee had emigrated. She was no longer just an Irish legend. She had become an American ghost story, a terrifying reminder that no matter how far you run, you can never escape your family or its curse. The stories say she weeps for a death that is coming. But in a world of 8 billion people, a world of constant, unseen tragedies, it forces us to ask a much more immediate and terrifying question. If the Banshee's cry is a prophecy, who is she weeping for right now? To even begin to answer that, we have to understand what it is we're listening for. We have to look into the shadows and see the shape of the thing that weeps. Because the creature we call the Banshee is not a single, defined entity. She is a phantom with 1,000 faces, a shifting spectral form whose appearance is as much a part of the prophecy as her cry. She is the maiden, the matron, and the crone. 3 faces of death, 3 forms of grief. Sometimes, she appears as a beautiful young woman, the maiden. Her hair is the color of spun gold or blood-red sunset. Her eyes are wells of sorrow, red from weeping for a life that has barely begun. She wears a simple white or gray dress, and she doesn't shriek or wail. Instead, she sings. Her voice is a lament, a song of pure, heartbreaking beauty that carries on the wind, a melody of profound loss for a soul that will never get to grow old. This is the Banshee that appears for the young, the promising, the ones taken far too soon. Imagine a small village in County Clare in the 1890s. A young man, the pride of his family, is set to leave for America. He's strong, smart, and his future is a bright, shining path. The night before he's meant to sail, his younger sister is woken by a song. It's the most beautiful, yet sorrowful music she has ever heard, seeming to drift from the riverbank just beyond their cottage. She looks out her window and sees a young woman by the water's edge, her form bathed in moonlight, singing a tune that makes the very stars seem to weep. The girl is mesmerized, not frightened. The next morning, her brother is found. A sudden tragic accident. He never made it to the ship. The beautiful maiden by the river was never seen again. Her song was not a threat. It was a requiem, an honor guard of sorrow for a life unlived. Then there is the matron. She appears as a stately, noble woman, tall and graceful, often cloaked in a dark hood. Her face is pale and sorrowful, but not twisted by grief. It's a face of solemn acceptance. This is the Banshee who appears for the pillars of a family, the respected elders, the chieftains. Her cry is not a song, but a deep, resonant wail. A keening that speaks not of tragic shock, but of the heavy, profound emptiness left behind when a great tree falls in the forest. It's the sound of a dynasty shaken, of a legacy coming to its end. She is seen pacing the halls of an ancestral home, a silent, gray guardian marking the final hours of its master. She doesn't hide in the shadows. She walks the grounds as if she owns them, her presence a formal announcement that a great soul is about to depart. Her grief is a measure of the life that was lived, a testament to the importance of the one she mourns. But it is the third form that has cemented the Banshee in the annals of terror. The crone. This is the creature of our nightmares. She is a stooped, gnarled figure, her face a mask of primal agonizing grief. Her skin is tight and pale over her skull, her eyes are burning red embers, and her mouth is a black, gaping maw from which the infamous shriek erupts. Her hair is thin and white, flying wildly around her as she claws at the air. Her clothes are rags, the tattered remains of a burial shroud. This is the Banshee that appears before a violent or terrible death. She is not a gentle singer or a solemn mourner. She is fury and horror personified. Her scream is a visceral physical force, a sound that doesn't just predict death. It feels like death itself, tearing through the night, shattering glass, and freezing the blood of anyone who hears it. There are countless tales of the crone. A farmer walking home at dusk sees a hunched figure by a stile, thinking it's an old beggar. As he gets closer, she looks up, and her eyes blaze with an unholy light. He turns and runs, the sound of her shriek chasing him all the way home. A sound so terrible it feels like his bones are vibrating. He bolts his door, collapses in terror, and spends the night praying. In the morning, he learns his cousin, a man known for his violent temper, was killed in a brutal tavern brawl at the very hour he heard the cry. The crone is not just a harbinger. She is a reflection of the horror to come. Her terrifying form mirrors the violent end of the one she cries for. Yet, perhaps the most common and most unsettling form the Banshee takes is no form at all. More often than not, she is never seen. She is only heard. A disembodied voice, a cry that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It can sound like it's right outside your window, but when you look, there's nothing there. It can sound like it's miles away, a faint echo on the wind, yet it's as clear as if it were whispered in your ear. This is what makes the legend so enduring. It's not just a monster you might see, it's a sound you might hear. A sound that bypasses the eyes and attacks the mind directly. It's the ultimate psychological horror. The imagination, fed by generations of folklore, conjures a terror far worse than any physical description. The cry hangs in the air, a promise of doom that you cannot see, cannot fight, and cannot escape. So are these three different entities, a maiden, a matron, and a crone, all sharing the same grim duty? Or are they three faces of the same single being, her form shifting to match the nature of the death she foretells? A beautiful song for a beautiful soul, a solemn wail for a noble life, and a terrifying shriek for a violent end. The lore suggests the latter, that the Banshee is a mirror, reflecting the life and death of the one she mourns. But this is where the legend becomes incredibly specific, and for some, far more personal and real. The Banshee does not cry for everyone. She is not a universal omen of death. She is an aristocrat of the supernatural world. Her grief is reserved for a select few. Specifically, she is bound to ancient Irish families, the ones with pure, unadulterated Gaelic blood. The great families whose names begin with an O or a Mac. O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Grady, McCarthy, MacDonald. Think about that. This isn't a random haunting. This is a targeted genealogical curse, or a blessing depending on how you see it. If your name doesn't carry that ancient lineage, you will never hear her cry. You could live next door to a man whose death is being heralded by her shriek, and you would sleep soundly through the night, completely unaware. It is an exclusive, inherited prophecy, a supernatural heirloom passed down through generations. The wail of the Banshee is a part of their family history, a spectral birthright. And as these families emigrated, fleeing famine and hardship, they took their phantom with them. Stories of her cries were heard not just in the misty glens of Ireland, but in the tenements of Boston, the prairies of the Midwest, and the bustling streets of New York. The Banshee crossed the ocean. She followed her families, which means even today, in the heart of modern America, there are families who carry this ancient connection. People who might not even know the full extent of their own heritage, who carry a name that links them to this terrifying weeping spirit, a phantom that has watched over their bloodline for 1,000 years, heralding the end for their ancestors, generation after generation. It transforms the Banshee from a piece of distant folklore into a potential and deeply personal reality. She isn't just a story, she is a family matter. But this deep ancient loyalty to a handful of bloodlines forces us to ask the most important question of all. Why? Why these specific families? What did their ancestors do to become forever bound to this screaming specter? Is the Banshee a curse, a punishment for some long-forgotten sin, shackling these families to a harbinger of horror? Or is she something else entirely? A protector, a guardian spirit, her cry not a threat, but a final ancient act of love. A warning to prepare the soul for its final journey. This very question splits the heart of Irish folklore down the middle. To some, the Banshee is a final spectral comfort in a world of harsh realities. A last remnant of the old magic, a supernatural attendant assigned to the great families of Ireland, a sign of their ancient nobility, a lament for a life well lived. To others, she is an auditory plague, a psychic wound inflicted upon a family in its most vulnerable moment. Her cry isn't a song of mourning. It's the sound of hell's gates creaking open, a shriek that promises not just death but damnation. The truth is, her nature seems to depend entirely on who you ask, and more importantly, which family you belong to. Because the Banshee is, above all else, an elitist. She does not cry for everyone. The lore is unshakably clear on this point. Her wail is reserved exclusively for the ancient Gaelic bloodlines of Ireland, the families with the O or the Mac prefixes in their names. O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Grady, McCarthy, MacDonald. These are the descendants of the old kings and chieftains, the true sons and daughters of the soil. It's said that to have a Banshee is to have undeniable proof of your noble, unadulterated Irish heritage. In a strange, morbid way, it's a status symbol. A terrifying, heart-stopping status symbol. Why this exclusivity? One theory suggests that in the mists of time, each of these great families was assigned a specific fairy spirit, a protector who would watch over them for all eternity. This spirit's final duty was to keen, to cry a traditional Irish lament, at the death of a family member, guiding their soul to the other side and announcing the loss to the clan. It's a beautiful, if sorrowful, idea. A supernatural continuity in a world of chaos. But there's a darker interpretation, that the Banshee is not a fairy, but an ancestor. The ghost of a woman from the family line, perhaps one who died in childbirth, was murdered or took her own life. A soul bound by tragedy to the family's fate, her own unresolved pain echoing through the generations as a warning. She is forever trapped between worlds, her only purpose to witness the endless cycle of death that she herself can never escape. Perhaps one of the most chillingly specific accounts comes not from a terrified peasant, but from a woman of high standing, Lady Anne Fanshawe. In 1642, she and her husband were staying in a castle belonging to the O'Brien family in County Clare. She was a guest, an outsider, with no connection to the family's bloodline or their spectral attendant. Late one night, she was jolted awake by a sound from the window. She described it as a ghostly scream, a dreadful, inhuman cry that seemed to well up from the very earth beneath the castle. Frozen in her bed, she saw in the moonlight a figure pressed against the glass from the outside. It was a woman with skin as pale as bone and long, wild red hair. The creature stared at her, its face a mask of sorrow and rage, and let out another wail that shook the very stones of the castle. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The next morning, terrified, Lady Fanshawe told her hosts what she had seen. Their reaction was not surprise, but a grim, somber acceptance. They informed her that a cousin of the family, who had been staying in the castle, had died in his sleep during the night. They explained that the figure she saw was a family spirit, a being sídhe. They told her that she always appears before a death in their line, her cry a prophecy that can never be ignored. What's truly terrifying about Lady Fanshawe's account is her status as an outsider. The Banshee didn't appear to a family member clouded by grief. She appeared to a neutral observer, a credible witness who had nothing to gain from the story. The spirit wasn't there for her, but she was caught in its wake, a bystander to a supernatural tragedy. This story paints the Banshee as a factual, observable phenomenon, a family's private specter. But for every tale of a solemn warning, there are a dozen that speak of pure, unadulterated terror. Imagine it. You're sitting by the fire, the wind howling outside. Your father is upstairs, sick in bed, his breathing shallow. The doctor has given him mere days. You're trying to find a moment of peace, to prepare yourself. And then you hear it. A low moan starting from far across the fields. It rises in pitch, a thin, sharp needle of sound that pierces the night. It's not the wind. It's not an animal. It's a sound of pure, concentrated grief, a sound no human throat could ever produce. It gets closer, circling the house, the wail of 1,000 grieving mothers condensed into one unbearable shriek. It's a sound that doesn't just enter your ears, it invades your mind. It bypasses logic and reason and strikes directly at the most primal part of your brain, the part that knows fear, the part that knows loss. You can't block it out. It seeps through the walls, through the glass, through your own bones. And in that moment, hope is gone. The doctor's timeline is irrelevant. The final grains of sand have fallen through the hourglass. Death isn't just coming, it's being announced. It's being celebrated by a screaming phantom outside your door. The warning isn't a comfort, it's a torment, a psychological torture that strips away any chance for a peaceful goodbye, replacing it with a soundtrack of utter despair. This is the Banshee as a curse, an entity that doesn't just foretell death, but revels in the sorrow it creates. Her cry is a poison arrow, aimed at the heart of a grieving family, ensuring their last moments with a loved one are filled not with love, but with abject horror. And her appearance is just as fluid, and just as terrifying as her intent. She is a shapeshifter, her form changing to match the message she brings. Most often, she is seen as the classic crone, the withered old hag with a face carved by centuries of sorrow, long stringy white or gray hair, eyes red and raw from weeping, and dressed in a tattered gray cloak or a white burial shroud. She is the embodiment of winter, of endings, of a life that has run its course. This is the Banshee of desolate landscapes, seen hunched over a stream, washing the blood-stained clothes of the one who is about to die. This is the washer at the ford, the Benai, a terrifying omen where the very act of cleaning is a promise of a bloody end. But she can also appear as a stately matron, a tall, pale woman in a long, elegant dress, her face sorrowful but dignified. This is the Banshee of the great houses, the spirit of a noble ancestress, her grief profound but contained. She doesn't shriek. She weeps, her sobs carrying on the wind, a more personal, intimate lament for the passing of a great man or woman. And then, perhaps most disturbingly, she can appear as a beautiful young woman, a girl with hair the color of fire or spun gold, and eyes that hold an ancient sadness. Dressed in white or green, she is the Banshee of a life cut tragically short. Her cry is the most piercing, the most painful, a scream of protest against the injustice of a young soul being torn from the world. Maiden, mother, crone, the three ancient faces of the goddess, twisted into a harbinger of death. Each form carries a different weight, a different kind of sorrow, but whether she is a beautiful girl or a terrifying hag, her message is always the same. Someone is going to die, and you cannot stop it. You cannot reason with it. You cannot fight it. She is not a ghost to be busted or a demon to be exorcised. She is a fundamental force, as inescapable as time itself. Her cry is not an event. It is the echo of an event that has already been decided by fate. But this raises a terrifying question. We think of her cry as a passive warning, a mere symptom of impending death. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if the sound itself is the weapon? What if her scream isn't just a prophecy, but the very thing that seals the final fatal wound? This is a terrifying thought because it reframes the entire legend. The Banshee is no longer a passive, grieving observer. She becomes an active participant, an executioner. To understand how this could even be possible, we have to look past folklore and into the strange, often unsettling world of acoustic science. We're all familiar with how sound can affect us. A beautiful piece of music can bring us to tears. The screech of nails on a chalkboard can make our skin crawl. But these are just emotional responses. What if a sound could be weaponized? What if a specific frequency, a specific pitch and timbre, could have a direct physical impact on the human body? It's not science fiction. It's a reality our own military has been exploring for decades. They call them sonic or acoustic weapons. These devices can project sound waves, often at frequencies humans can't even consciously hear, to disorient, incapacitate, and cause intense pain. There's a specific range of sound called infrasound below 20 Hz. That's particularly insidious. It's too low for our ears to register as a distinct tone, but our bodies feel it. Infrasound at the right intensity can cause vibrations in our internal organs. It can affect our vision, making us see flickering shadows in our periphery. It can induce feelings of intense anxiety, dread, and a profound sense of sorrow. Scientists have dubbed 19 Hz the fear frequency. In experiments, people exposed to it without knowing they were reported overwhelming feelings of being watched, of a presence in the room with them. They felt a chill run down their spine, a pressure on their chest. Sound familiar? It's a near-perfect description of the sensations people report during a paranormal encounter. It's led some researchers to believe that many so-called hauntings are simply the result of naturally occurring infrasound, created by wind patterns, humming machinery, or unique architectural acoustics. Now, imagine a being not bound by the laws of our physics, a supernatural entity whose entire existence is defined by its voice. What if the Banshee's wail isn't just a sound? What if it's a perfectly tuned biological sonic weapon? A sound that operates on a frequency that doesn't just suggest dread, but mainlines it directly into the human nervous system. A cry so perfectly resonant with our cellular structure that it can literally shake us apart from the inside out. A vibration that can disrupt the delicate electrical rhythm of the human heart, causing it to stutter, to seize, to stop. In this scenario, the person doesn't die of fright. They die from a targeted acoustic assault. The scream isn't a warning of death. It's the delivery mechanism. The family hears a mournful cry from a distance, but for the intended victim, it's a focused blast of lethal energy. This would explain why so many who hear the Banshee and survive describe it as a sound that felt like it was inside their own head, a physical pressure as much as an auditory event. But there's another theory, one that's arguably even more disturbing, because it doesn't rely on supernatural physics. It relies on the terrifying power of the human mind. Let's say the scream has no direct physical effect at all. It's just a sound. The real weapon isn't the sound itself, but the idea of the sound. We've all heard of the placebo effect. You take a sugar pill, believing it's powerful medicine, and your symptoms actually improve. Your belief is so strong it creates a real physiological change in your body. But the placebo has a dark twin, a much lesser known but equally powerful phenomenon, the nocebo effect. It's the exact same principle, but in reverse. If a person is convinced that something will harm them, their own belief can make them sick, or even kill them. There are documented medical cases of this. Patients in clinical trials who are secretly given a placebo, but are told the pill has severe side effects, will begin to develop those exact side effects. People have died after being misdiagnosed with a terminal illness, their bodies shutting down simply because they believed their time was up. There are even cases of individuals who have been cursed by a voodoo priest and have wasted away and died, with no medical explanation whatsoever. Their death was caused by one thing: the absolute, unshakable conviction that they were doomed. Now apply this to the Banshee. For centuries, if you were born into one of the great Gaelic families, the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, you were raised on these stories. The legend of the Banshee isn't a spooky campfire tale. It's a fundamental part of your heritage, your identity. It's woven into your family's history, as real as your grandfather's name or the land your ancestors walked. You are conditioned from birth to know, with absolute certainty, that to hear her cry is to receive your own death sentence. So, imagine you're a descendant of one of these families. You're walking home late one night. The air is still, and then you hear it. A sound that cuts through the silence, a wail so filled with grief it freezes the blood in your veins. It's a sound you have been subconsciously trained your entire life to recognize and fear. In that one terrifying moment, the nocebo effect is triggered. It's not a question of if you will die. It's a certainty. A switch has been flipped in your subconscious mind. Your brain, convinced of its own impending demise, begins to send signals throughout your body. Adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones, flood your system. Your heart rate becomes erratic. Your blood pressure skyrockets. Your immune system might even begin to attack healthy tissue. You are, in effect, thinking yourself to death. The Banshee didn't need to touch you. She didn't need to fire a single sonic wave. All she had to do was plant an idea so powerful, so deeply rooted in culture and belief, that your own body becomes the murder weapon. Consider the story of Lorcan O'Hanlon, a Dublin barrister in the early 20th century, a man of logic, reason, and law. He scoffed at the old tales his grandmother told him. He was a modern man in a modern world. One evening, while working late in his study, his window slightly ajar, he heard it. He later described it to his wife not as a scream, but as a weeping of pure despair that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He slammed the window shut, his heart pounding, dismissing it as the wind or a fox. But the seed was planted. Over the next 2 days, Lorcan, a perfectly healthy man in his early 40s, deteriorated. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He complained to his wife of a crushing weight on his chest, a feeling of unraveling. He told her, "I know how this sounds, but I feel like my soul is trying to leave my body." Doctors were called. They found nothing physically wrong with him. They prescribed sedatives for what they called an acute anxiety attack. On the 3rd night, his wife awoke to find him sitting bolt upright in bed, his eyes wide, staring at the corner of the room. He whispered a single word, "Listen." Then he collapsed. Lorcan O'Hanlon was dead. The official cause of death was listed as a massive coronary event. But his family knew. The man of logic had been killed by a legend. This is the insidious genius of the Banshee. Is she a supernatural assassin using acoustic physics beyond our comprehension? Or is she a master of psychological warfare, leveraging centuries of belief to turn her victims' own minds against them? The truth is, it doesn't matter. The result is the same: a mournful cry in the night, followed by an inevitable death. But all of these theories assume the Banshee is an external force, an entity that attacks from the outside. We've been thinking of her as a messenger, a sniper, a psychological trigger. But we've overlooked the most intimate and horrifying possibility of all. What if her connection to the families isn't just ancestral? What if it's biological? What if the Banshee isn't something you hear in the wind, but something that's already sleeping in your blood? This idea that the Banshee is a feature of one's very biology is not as modern as it sounds. In fact, it's the oldest interpretation of all. It speaks to a time when blood wasn't just a fluid that carries oxygen. Blood was lineage. It was legacy. It was magic. To understand this, we have to look past the shivering tales told around a fire and into the stone halls of ancient Irish kings. We have to look at the great families, the O's and the Macs, O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, Kavanagh, surnames that ring through history like a battle horn. These families believed the Banshee wasn't a curse to be feared, but a birthright, a terrifying, soul-shaking honor reserved only for those with pure, ancient blood. And for the mighty O'Brien clan, descendants of the legendary High King Brian Boru, their Banshee had a name. She wasn't some nameless, shrieking phantom. She was a queen. Her name was Eabhal. Eabhal wasn't a ghost in the way we think of one. She was believed to be a powerful fairy woman, a goddess of the local land, a remnant of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the mythical, magical race that ruled Ireland before mortals. Her seat of power was a place called Craglia, a stony hill in County Clare, not far from the O'Brien's royal seat at Kincora. She was the O'Brien's protector, their patron, their guardian spirit. And her relationship with them wasn't one of terror, but of a deep, almost feudal loyalty. The land was hers, the O'Briens were her chosen rulers of that land, and she was bound to their bloodline for eternity. The most famous story of Eabhal and the O'Briens takes place on the eve of the most pivotal battle in Irish history. The year is 1014. The High King, Brian Boru, now an old man, has finally done the impossible. He has united the warring clans of Ireland under a single banner to drive out the Viking invaders for good. His army is camped at Clontarf, just outside Dublin. The fate of a nation hangs in the balance. The night before the battle, as the king tries to rest, a visitor comes to his tent. It is Eabhal. She doesn't scream. She doesn't wail. She appears to him in all her otherworldly beauty and speaks to him directly. She tells him what he already knows in his heart, that he will be victorious tomorrow. The Vikings will be broken, and Ireland will be free. But then she tells him the price of that victory. She tells him that he, the High King, will not live to see the sunset. He will fall in battle. Imagine that moment. This isn't a random specter foretelling doom. This is a queen speaking to a king. It's a solemn, private, and profoundly intimate prophecy. It is the ultimate acceptance of fate. Brian Boru doesn't flee. He doesn't try to change his destiny. He accepts the words of his family's guardian. He leads his men into battle the next day, and just as Eabhal predicted, the Irish win a legendary victory, and the High King is slain. His death wasn't heralded by a scream that echoed across the battlefield for all to hear. It was foretold in a quiet, regal whisper, for his ears only. This changes everything. If the original Banshee, the archetypal harbinger, was a figure like Eabhal, then her cry is not a threat. It is a lament. It is the deep, soul-shattering grief of a guardian spirit who has just lost one of her own. It's a sound of mourning, not malice. A final, supernatural salute to a royal bloodline. This is why, for centuries, hearing the banshee was considered a mark of nobility. If she cried for you, it meant your blood was pure. It meant you were important enough for the old gods to notice your passing. It meant you were one of the true families of Ireland. This concept of a family spirit isn't unique to the O'Briens. Other great clans had their own named banshees, each a powerful fairy woman bound to a specific bloodline and a specific piece of land. It was a supernatural contract written in blood and soil. The name itself, the O or the Mac, was the key. It means descendant of or son of. The banshee wasn't attached to a name you picked. She was attached to the ancestor whose blood flowed in your veins. So what happens when that blood leaves the land? What happens when an O'Brien or an O'Neill or a Kavanagh boards a ship during the Great Famine, desperate to escape starvation, and travels 3,000 miles to Boston or New York or Chicago? Does the ancient pact dissolve at the shoreline? Does the magic of the old country fade with the salt spray? The stories say no. The blood remembers. Generations can pass. The family name might be shortened or misspelled on a document at Ellis Island. The stories of the old country might be forgotten, replaced by the hustle of building a new life in America. A young man in Philadelphia, a descendant of the O'Briens, might know nothing of Brianborough or the Battle of Clontarf. He might think of himself as just an American, his Irish heritage nothing more than a vague theme for a St. Patrick's Day party. But the blood knows. An Aobhall knows the blood. So when his time comes on a quiet night in a sterile hospital room, thousands of miles and 1,000 years removed from the halls of Kincora, his family might hear something strange outside the window. A sound that doesn't belong. A cry that cuts through the noise of the city traffic. A sound of pure, undiluted grief. They'll dismiss it as the wind or a siren or an animal. They have no frame of reference for what it truly is. It is the sound of an ancient promise being kept. It is the lament of a fairy queen for her fallen kinsman. She hasn't forgotten him, even if he has long forgotten her. This transforms the banshee from a simple folk monster into something far more profound. She is a living embodiment of heritage, a supernatural record keeper of ancestry. She is the ultimate proof that you can take the family out of the old country, but you can never take the old country out of the family's blood. It suggests a connection to our past that is so powerful, so primal, that it defies time, distance, and even memory itself. But this raises a darker, more unsettling question. A banshee like Aobhall was a guardian, a protector bound by honor to a noble family. Her lament was a sign of respect for a life well lived, a death of significance. But what happens when that nobility is lost? What happens when a member of one of these ancient bloodlines, someone who carries the legacy of kings within them, commits an act of pure evil? A betrayal so profound it stains the very blood in their veins? What happens when a descendant of heroes becomes a monster? Does the guardian spirit still lament? Or does her cry change? Does the sound of grief curdle into a shriek of rage? A sound of judgment? If the banshee is a protector of the bloodline, what does she do when the greatest threat to that bloodline's honor comes from within? Does the guardian become the executioner? To answer that question, we must journey back, deeper into the mist, before the wailing woman was tied to a single house, to a time when her cry was not for a single soul, but for the soul of a nation. We must look to the battlefield, because the banshee, the gentle weeping spirit we've come to know, has a much older, much darker, and far more terrifying sister. Her name is the Bab. The Bab is not a mourner. She is a goddess of war. A member of the Morrigan, the trio of phantom queens who presided over bloodshed and sovereignty in ancient Ireland. When armies gathered and the air grew thick with the metallic tang of fear and drawn steel, it was the Bab who would appear. But not as a pale woman in white. She came as a scald crow, a carrion bird, flying over the heads of the warriors. Her guttural caused a prophecy of the slaughter to come. She didn't just predict death. She reveled in it. She would incite confusion and terror in the ranks, her presence a supernatural guarantee that the earth would soon run red. She was the embodiment of the chaos and the frenzy of battle. Imagine the scene at the Battle of Clontarf in the year 1014. The High King of Ireland, Brianborough, leading his army against a Viking force. Legend tells us that the night before the battle, the The bat was seen, not weeping, but shrieking in exultation over the Irish camp. Her cry wasn't a lament for the king's coming death. It was a promise of the carnage she would feast upon. She was the divine sanction for the violence to come, a force of nature that saw war not as a tragedy, but as a necessary brutal sacrament. This is the Banshee in her primal form, not a guardian of a family, but a chooser of the slain for an entire people. She is the raw, untamed spirit of a violent land. So what happened? How did this terrifying crow-like goddess of war evolve into the spectral weeping woman attached to the great Gaelic families? As Ireland changed, so did its gods and spirits. The age of grand, sweeping battles between kings and invaders gave way to a more fractured, clan-based society. The old gods didn't disappear. They were diminished, localized. Their immense power, once spread across the entire island, became concentrated, focused on the noble bloodlines that now ruled the land. The bat, the national arbiter of death, fractured into 1,000 pieces, and each piece attached itself to a family. Her battlefield shriek, once for a king, became an intimate wail for a chieftain. The scald crow of war became the woman of the fairy mound, the bean sídhe. But she never truly lost her teeth. The memory of the war goddess, the judge, lingered within the weeping woman. And this is where we find the answer to our question. The Banshee's loyalty is not to an individual. It is to the bloodline itself, to its honor, its legacy, its purity. And when a member of that bloodline commits an act so vile it stains that honor, an act of kinslaying, of profound betrayal, of cowardice that shames generations past and future, the Banshee's grief turns to wrath. The lament becomes a curse. The warning becomes a sentence. There's a story told of the O'Donnell clan in Donegal. A younger brother, consumed by greed, murdered his older sibling in secret, burying him in an unmarked grave and claiming he had run off to Spain. The family, though suspicious, had no proof, and the matter was quietly dropped to avoid scandal. The younger brother inherited the lands, the title, everything he ever wanted. But on the night he moved into the castle, as a storm raged outside, a cry was heard. It wasn't the soft, sorrowful keen the family knew. This was a shriek of pure, undiluted fury, a sound that stripped the paint from the walls and curdled the milk in the pantry. The new lord knew who it was for. The Banshee, the eternal witness of his bloodline, had seen his crime. She knew. From that night on, she never left him. Her screaming face would appear in the bottom of his wine glass. Her wail would be the only thing he could hear in a crowded room. She haunted his every waking moment and twisted his dreams into nightmares of his brother's dying breath. He couldn't silence her because she wasn't an external sound. She was the sound of his own corrupted blood screaming at him. Within a year, he was a gibbering wreck, a madman who confessed his crime to the empty air before throwing himself from the highest tower of the castle he had killed for. The Banshee fell silent. Justice for the bloodline had been served. The guardian had become the executioner. This is the Banshee's ultimate role. She is the conscience of the clan. She is the supernatural enforcement of the sacred bonds of kinship. You can lie to your family, you can deceive your priests, you can escape the laws of man. But you cannot escape the judgment of the spirit who has watched your ancestors rise and fall, who knows the secret history of your very DNA. Her cry in these moments is not a prophecy of a coming death. It is the instrument of it. It is a psychic assault, a weaponized grief that erodes the sanity of the guilty until death is the only escape. This terrifying aspect of the Banshee is most vividly captured in another of her forms, the washer at the ford. The Benai. Picture a lonely traveler, making his way home as twilight bleeds across the sky. He comes to a river crossing and sees a figure there, hunched over the water. It's a woman, small and grim, and she is washing clothes in the river. As he gets closer, he sees that the clothes are stained crimson. It's a burial shroud, and the water around her runs red with blood. This is the moment his heart freezes, because the washer at the ford only ever washes the grave clothes of those who are about to die. To see her is a death sentence. To approach her is to confront your own fate. In some tales, if you are brave enough to ask her whose clothes she is washing, she will look up, her eyes ancient and devoid of pity, and she will speak your name. In that moment, your fate is sealed. There is no escape. She is not warning you. She is informing you. The decision has been made. The paperwork, so to speak, is already being processed. This isn't a passive observer of destiny. This is an active, terrifying functionary of the underworld. The washer at the ford reveals the Banshee's true nature. She exists at the boundary, between the living and the dead, between the natural and the supernatural, between grief and judgment. She is the final arbiter, the one who cleans up the bloody messes of life before the soul passes on. Whether she is a crow, a wailing woman, or a grim washerwoman, her purpose is the same: to bear witness to the transition, and to ensure that the accounts of the bloodline are settled. So the Banshee is not merely a passive omen. She is an active force, a moral agent bound to the very families she haunts. She is a reminder that some ties are inescapable, that blood remembers, that honor has a guardian, and that when that honor is betrayed, the sound you hear is not just a lament for the dead, but a judgment for the wicked, a promise that justice, one way or another, is coming. But these stories, these deep primal fears, are rooted in the ancient soil of Ireland. They belong to the O'Neills, the O'Connors, the O'Donnells, the McCarthys, the Kavanaghs. What happened when these families were scattered by famine, by war, by opportunity? What happened when the bloodline she was sworn to protect crossed the vast, empty ocean to build new lives in a new world? Did the Banshee's cry fade on the Irish wind? Or did it learn to travel? Could her wail, born in the misty glens of Kerry, find its way to the steel canyons of New York, the dusty plains of Texas, or the foggy shores of San Francisco? Did the harbinger of death emigrate? The question hangs in the air, carried on a ghost of a wind from the old world to the new. To answer it, we have to understand that the Banshee was never truly tied to the soil of Ireland. She was tied to the soul, to the blood. She is a supernatural genealogist, a spectral keeper of family trees whose roots run deeper than any geography. So when the soul of Ireland was ripped from its home, when the blood of the great families was spilled not onto the battlefield but into the bilge of coffin ships, the Banshee had no choice. She had to follow her families. The Great Famine and Gorda Moor, the Great Hunger, was the catalyst. From 1845 to 1852, 1 million people died and 1 million more fled. They didn't just pack their meager belongings, they packed their folklore, their faith, their fears. They carried the memory of the keening women at wakes, a sound that had now become the soundtrack to an entire nation's death rattle. And as they crossed the vast, unforgiving Atlantic, their ancient protector, their personal harbinger, traveled with them. She wasn't a passenger in the manifest, but she was there, a phantom presence in the sea mist, her cry lost in the howl of the ocean wind, waiting to be heard again on a new continent. And she was heard. Imagine New York City, 1855. The Five Points, a notorious slum, is crammed with desperate Irish immigrants. In a tenement room reeking of coal smoke and boiled cabbage, a young girl named Aoife O'Sullivan listens to her father's ragged breathing. He'd been a strong man in County Cork, but the New York docks had broken him, filling his lungs with a sickness that rattled his bones. One night, a sound slices through the din of the city, the clatter of carts, the shouting, the distant clang of a streetcar. It's a wail, a high, thin, soul-shattering cry coming from the fire escape outside their grimy window. It's a sound that doesn't belong here. It's the sound of the misty glens, the sound her grandmother whispered of in stories meant to terrify children into behaving. Aoife freezes, the blood turning to ice in her veins. Her mother makes the sign of the cross, her lips moving in a silent prayer. The next morning, the tenement is quiet. Her father's chest is still. The Banshee had found the O'Sullivans even here in a city of millions, a world away from the green hills they called home. The wail didn't just haunt the crowded cities of the East Coast. It pushed westward with the pioneers, with the soldiers, with the men who laid the iron veins of the railroad across the heart of a new nation. Picture the Sierra Nevada mountains, 1868. A crew of Irish laborers, led by a foreman named Sean Murphy, is blasting a path for the Central Pacific Railroad. Murphy is a man of the New World. He's left the old superstitions behind with the poverty and the pain of Ireland. He believes in dynamite, sweat, and the American dollar. One night, under a canopy of stars so bright they seem to burn holes in the sky, a cry echoes through the granite canyons. It's not a mountain lion. It's not a coyote. It's a lament, pure and piercing, a sound of utter despair that seems to come from the rock itself. The men, fresh off the boat and closer to their roots, shift uneasily, whispering the old name. Bean Sídhe. Murphy scoffs. It's the wind, you fools. Get some sleep. We've got a mountain to move tomorrow. The next day, a charge of black powder, poorly set, detonates prematurely. The mountain does not move, but it takes Sean Murphy with it. His men, standing over his broken body, know it wasn't the wind they heard. The Banshee had followed the Murphy bloodline across an entire continent, from the shores of Dublin to the peaks of California, to announce a death that was fated in the stone and the stars. The stories kept coming, whispered in mining towns in Pennsylvania, in the stockyards of Chicago, in the Irish Channel of New Orleans. A Connolly family in Scranton hears the cry the night before a mine collapses. A McGuire in Boston hears it from the harbor just before a fishing boat is lost in a storm. The details change, the locations shift, but the core elements remain terrifyingly consistent. The ancient Irish name, the unmistakable wailing, and the death that follows as surely as dawn follows night. But as the Irish assimilated into the great American melting pot, the story of the Banshee began to change too. It began to fray at the edges. In Ireland, her connection was specific, almost clinical. She wept for the O'Gradys, the Onells, the O'Connors, the Kavanaghs, the McNeils, the families of pure Milesian stock. But in America, bloodlines mingled. An O'Malley married a Schmidt. A Fitzgerald married a Chun. The ancient names, the pure blood that acted as a supernatural beacon, became diluted. The signal grew weaker. The Banshee's identity also began to blur. In the American Southwest, her story sometimes became entangled with the legend of La Llorona, the wailing woman of Hispanic folklore. Both are weeping female spirits, their cries portending tragedy, but their motivations are worlds apart. La Llorona wails in eternal torment for the children she murdered. Her cry is a threat, a curse, a danger to the living. The Banshee weeps not for her own sins, but for the impending loss of a family she is sworn to follow. Her cry is not a threat. It is a warning, an expression of shared grief from the otherworld. She is a supernatural mourner, not a malevolent monster. This distinction is crucial. Yet, in the vast, culturally diverse landscape of America, these nuances began to fade. The Banshee, for many, became just another ghost story. Another woman in white, who haunted a particular road or a specific house. Her profound ancient connection to family and lineage was often lost, replaced by a more generic, less personal brand of horror. She was no longer your family's harbinger. She was just a spooky legend. So, does she still cry in America today? The answer is maybe. The old world of pure, traceable Gaelic bloodlines is gone. But the blood is still here, flowing in the veins of millions of Americans who can trace their ancestry back to that small green island. And in the quiet corners of the internet, on paranormal forums and Reddit threads, the stories still surface. Someone in a Chicago suburb, in a house full of people with the last name Ryan, hears an inexplicable wailing outside their window on the night their grandfather passes away peacefully in his sleep. A hiker in the Appalachian Mountains, a descendant of the Scots-Irish settlers, records a strange, mournful sound on his phone that acoustics experts can't identify, only to learn a distant cousin died in a car crash that same evening. These modern accounts are rarer, more anecdotal. They lack the chilling certainty of the old tales. Is it a trick of the wind? A fox? A fish or cat, whose scream is notoriously human-like? Or is it her? Is the Banshee still out there, her voice strained, trying to cut through the noise of the 21st century? The traffic, the televisions, the endless digital chatter? Is her wail still searching for the faint, genetic echo of the families she followed across the sea generations ago? Perhaps the most terrifying thought isn't that she's gone, but that she's still here, and we've simply forgotten how to listen. We've rationalized her voice into the wind and dismissed her warnings as folklore. But this raises a deeper, more fundamental question. We've explored who she is, what she looks like, and where she's gone. But we haven't truly faced the source of her power. Her voice. The wail itself. What is it about a woman's scream, a cry of pure, undiluted grief, that strikes such a primal chord of terror in the human soul? Is there something in our evolutionary wiring, something in the very physics of sound, that makes the keening of the Banshee the most horrifying sound a person can ever hear? To understand the terror of the Banshee's cry, we have to look past the folklore and into the very architecture of our own minds. The answer isn't just in the supernatural. It's hardwired into our biology, a ghost in our own machine. Our brains are ancient organs built for survival on the savannah, not for rational thought in a quiet room. And for millions of years, survival has depended on one thing above all else: sound. Specifically, the ability to instantly recognize and react to sounds of distress and danger. Think about the sounds that make the hair on your arms stand up. A baby's cry, fingernails on a chalkboard, a fire alarm, a human scream. These aren't just loud noises. They share a specific, hidden acoustic quality that scientists call nonlinear acoustics. Most sounds in our world, like a conversation or a piece of music, have predictable, smooth sound waves. But these terror-inducing sounds are different. Their sound waves are chaotic, jagged, and unpredictable. They have a quality known as roughness, a rapid, jarring fluctuation in frequency that our brains are uniquely tuned to despise. When a sound with this roughness hits our ears, it doesn't take the scenic route through the analytical, logical parts of our brain. It takes a shortcut, a direct, high-speed pipeline straight to the amygdala, the brain's primitive fear center. It's an override switch. Bypasses reason. Bypasses thought. It just screams one word: danger. This is why you flinch at the sound of a scream before you even know what caused it. Your biology has already made the decision for you. And the Banshee's cry, as described in countless accounts, is the apex predator of this acoustic world. It is the ultimate expression of roughness. It's not just a wail, it's a sound that seems to tear the very fabric of the air. It's described as having a pitch that is impossibly high, a volume that is impossibly loud, and a duration that no human lungs could ever sustain. It is a sound that is fundamentally unnatural. It's a signal that something is deeply, existentially wrong with reality itself. But there's another, even more insidious layer to this. It's a phenomenon known as infrasound. These are sound waves with a frequency so low, below 20 Hz, that they fall beneath the threshold of human hearing. You can't hear it, but you can feel it. It vibrates through your bones, through your chest cavity, resonating with your internal organs. In the 1980s, an engineer named Vic Tandy was working in a laboratory that was rumored to be haunted. People reported seeing shadowy figures, feeling a sense of dread, a cold chill, a feeling of being watched. Tandy himself felt it. One day, he noticed a blade in a vise was vibrating on its own. He discovered the source. A new fan in the lab was emitting a silent, powerful wave of infrasound at a frequency of 19 Hz. Once the fan was turned off, the haunting stopped. Scientists have since replicated these effects. Infrasound has been shown to cause feelings of anxiety, extreme sorrow, paranoia, and even visual and auditory hallucinations. It can make you feel a presence in the room when there is none. Now imagine this. Before you even hear the audible shriek of the Banshee, her very presence might be generating this silent, pervasive wave of terror. A low, thrumming dread that seeps into your bones, priming your amygdala, setting your nerves on fire, making you feel a profound sense of doom long before her voice ever breaks the silence. You are already terrified and you don't even know why. Then the audible cry begins. And this is where the psychology becomes just as important as the physics. The Banshee's cry is not the roar of a monster. A lion's roar is terrifying, but it's simple. It's a predator and it wants to kill you. It's a threat to be fought or fled from. The Banshee's cry is infinitely more complex and horrifying. It is not a cry of aggression. It is a cry of pure, undiluted grief. This is a critical distinction. It taps into something far deeper than our fear of death. It taps into our fear of loss. It's an empathic weapon. When we hear that sound, our brain doesn't just register danger. It registers a profound, soul-shattering sorrow. It's the sound of a mother who has lost her child, a wife who has lost her husband, a being that has witnessed the end of a lineage. It's a sound that communicates utter and complete hopelessness. There is no fighting it. There is no running from it. The tragedy it foretells is already in motion. It's an announcement of an ending that cannot be stopped. This combination, the acoustically weaponized roughness of a scream, the potential for disorienting infrasound, and the deep psychological trigger of a grief-stricken wail, creates a perfect storm of terror. Consider the account of the O'Donnell family in County Clare in 1847. During the height of the Great Famine, death was a constant, silent visitor in every home. Their patriarch, Seamus, was fading from fever. His son, Owen, sat by his bedside through the long nights, listening to the shallow rasp of his father's breath. One night, a stillness fell over the land, a heavy silence that felt more profound than a mere absence of noise. Owen felt a pressure in his chest, a deep, unexplainable sadness that felt ancient, a sorrow that wasn't his own. This was the infrasound, the silent overture. Then it started. It began low from somewhere out on the bog, a sound like the wind moaning through a crack in a stone wall. But it grew. It wasn't just one note. It was a chord of misery, 1,000 weeping voices braided into one. It climbed in pitch, past what Owen thought was possible for any living throat, into a register that vibrated behind his eyes and in his teeth. It had the roughness we spoke of, a grating, tearing quality that felt like it was shredding his nerves. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it was useless. The sound wasn't just outside, it was inside his skull. But the worst part, the part that broke him, was the emotion within it. It wasn't the scream of a beast. It was the sound of love being destroyed. He could hear, in that single impossible wail, the echo of every O'Donnell who had ever lived and died. He heard the sorrow of his own mother for the husband she was about to lose. He even heard his own future grief for the father he was watching die. It was a complete, perfect, and unbearable symphony of loss. It didn't make him want to run. It made him want to lie down and die. It stripped away all hope, all fight, and left only the cold, hard certainty of the grave. When the sound finally faded, the silence it left behind was even worse. Owen looked at his father. The rasping breath had stopped. This is the power of the Banshee's cry. It operates on what we might call the uncanny valley of sound. We know what a human cry of grief sounds like. The Banshee's wail is just close enough to that to be recognizable, to trigger our empathy. But it is also fundamentally wrong. It is too long, too high, too powerful. It is human but not human. And that cognitive dissonance, that inability for our brain to categorize what it's hearing, amplifies the terror tenfold. It is a sound that breaks the rules of our reality. And if the rules of sound can be broken, what other, more terrible rules are about to be shattered? The scream is a warning, but it's also a verdict. It doesn't just tell you that death is coming. It forces you to experience the full emotional devastation of that death before it has even happened. It is grief weaponized. It is sorrow perfected. The question then becomes, is this terrifyingly precise weapon a product of our own minds, a hallucination born of fear and suggestion? Or has this ancient spirit had millennia to perfect its craft, to learn the exact frequencies and emotional triggers that can shatter a human soul? The human brain is a master of pattern recognition. It's a survival mechanism, hardwired into our DNA. We see faces in clouds, hear voices in the static of an untuned radio. This phenomenon, auditory pareidolia, is the skeptic's primary explanation for the Banshee's cry. In a state of heightened anxiety, already anticipating a loss, the grieving mind becomes a hypersensitive instrument. The wind whistling through a cracked window pane, the distant cry of a fox, the high-pitched whine of aging electronics, any of these could be the raw material. Grief and fear then act as the artists, sculpting that mundane sound into something terrifying, something meaningful. A wail that confirms our worst fears. It's a compelling argument. In our world saturated with noise, the signal is often lost. How could anyone, in a modern city humming with the drone of traffic and the chorus of sirens, definitively identify a supernatural scream? The mind, suggestible and desperate for answers in the face of the ultimate unknown, simply fills in the blanks. The legend of the Banshee provides a pre-written script for our sorrow, a dramatic and ancient narrative to impose upon the chaotic, senseless reality of death. It gives tragedy a sense of order, of ancient importance. We hear what we expect to hear. We hear what we've been told for generations to listen for. And yet, the stories persist. They don't just persist, they evolve. They cross oceans. The Banshee, it seems, is not bound by the rocky shores of her homeland. For a spirit so intrinsically linked to the soil and soul of Ireland, this presents a fascinating question. What happens when the family leaves the land? Does the Banshee's cry fade over the Atlantic, or does her loyalty, her ancient pact, follow them to the New World? The great waves of Irish immigration in the 19th and 20th centuries carried millions to the shores of America, Canada, and Australia. They brought with them what little they could carry, but they also brought their invisible baggage, their culture, their faith, and their fears. And apparently, they brought their fairy woman. Accounts began to surface from the tenements of New York, the farmlands of the Midwest, the goldfields of California. Stories of a keening cry heard in the dead of night, a sound utterly alien to the new landscape, followed inevitably by a telegram from the old country bearing tragic news. Or worse, the cry would precede a death in the new home, a sign that the family's fate, and their connection to the otherworldly had made the crossing with them. One such account comes from a family of O'Sullivans who settled in Boston in the late 1880s. The patriarch, a dockworker named Finian, fell gravely ill with pneumonia. One night, his eldest son Liam was sitting vigil by the window, watching the gaslights flicker on the wet cobblestones. Suddenly, a sound cut through the city's din. It wasn't a sound he recognized. It was a high, piercing wail of pure sorrow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It rose and fell, a lament of such profound despair that the hair on Liam's arm stood on end. He saw no one in the street below. The sound faded, leaving an unnerving silence. 2 hours later, his father passed away. Liam was convinced. The banshee of his grandmother's tales was not just a story to frighten children by the peat fire. She was real, and she had followed them to America. This raises a crucial element of the lore, one that adds a layer of chilling specificity. The banshee is not a universal harbinger of death. She is fiercely, almost obsessively exclusive. She attends only to the oldest Gaelic families, those whose lineage can be traced back through the mists of time. Specifically, she is said to cry only for families with the prefix Mac or O in their surnames. The MacDonalds, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the McCarthys. These prefixes, meaning son of and grandson of respectively, denote a direct link to the ancient clans of Ireland. If your name is Smith or Jones or Williams, you have nothing to fear from her. She is not your messenger. This detail is critical. It transforms her from a random phantom into a figure bound by ancient laws of kinship and loyalty. It's as if she is part of a supernatural contract, her service tied to specific bloodlines for all eternity. This exclusivity has become a strange point of pride for some. To be of a family who has a banshee is to have an undeniable, supernatural confirmation of your ancient Irish heritage. It's a badge of honor, a direct link to the mythic past. But it is an honor that comes with a terrible price, the foreknowledge of your family's deepest sorrows. Imagine the sheer, jarring dissonance of this ancient spirit manifesting in our modern world. Think of the banshee's cry not in a misty glen, but echoing down the sterile, linoleum-tiled corridor of a hospital. A sound of primal organic grief piercing the rhythmic, electronic beeping of heart monitors and ventilators. Picture her, a figure of gossamer and shadow, standing not outside a thatched-roof cottage, but on the manicured lawn of a suburban cul-de-sac, her wail drowned out by the drone of a passing airplane. This collision of the ancient and the modern is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the banshee's survival. She doesn't belong here. She is an echo of a world ruled by magic, not medicine, by superstition, not science. Her presence is a stark reminder that for all our technological advancement and rational thought, we still die. And in that final universal experience, perhaps the old rules still apply. Her cry in this context becomes an act of defiance. It's a protest against the cold, impersonal nature of modern death. She is the last vestige of a time when death was a communal spiritual event, not a clinical one. This forces us to re-examine her role. Is she truly a harbinger of death? Or is she something more? In many traditions, she isn't seen as a malevolent force, but as a final, profound act of empathy. She is a supernatural mourner, a keener whose grief is so powerful it crosses the veil between worlds. The Irish tradition of keening, a vocal lament for the dead performed by women, was a vital part of the grieving process. The keening women were respected figures who helped the community process its loss through a ritualized public display of sorrow. Could the banshee be the ultimate keener? A spirit who feels the coming severance of a soul from its ancient bloodline so acutely that she is compelled to cry out? In this light, her scream is not a threat, but a tribute. It is an acknowledgement that a life of significance is about to end, that a link in an ancient chain is about to be broken. She cries because no one else can. She is the grief of the ancestors given voice. She is the personification of the family's sorrow, arriving just before the sorrow itself. This reframes her from a terrifying omen to a tragic, sympathetic figure, bound by an eternal duty. She doesn't cause the death. She merely announces its arrival with a grief that is older than memory. She is the final connection to the homeland, the last whisper of the old Gaelic soul before it is extinguished. She ensures that no matter how far her family has roamed, no matter how disconnected they have become from their roots, they will not die unnoticed by the ancient guardians of their clan. But this raises an even deeper question. If her cry is a lament, a final act of connection, What does it mean for those who hear it? Is it a comfort or a curse? To be warned of an impending death is to be given a moment to prepare, to say goodbye. But it is also to be robbed of hope, to be forced to wait for the inevitable blow to fall. It is to live the last hours of a loved one's life under a supernatural death sentence. And in our modern world, a world that has tried so hard to sanitize and hide death away, this raw, unavoidable pronouncement is more terrifying than ever. The Banshee doesn't just foretell a death. She drags the ancient, terrible, and sacred reality of it back into the light. She is a living contradiction in our sterile, brightly lit world. A raw, untamed piece of the ancient wilderness howling at the edge of our meticulously planned lives. We have built walls of science and reason to keep the darkness out, to explain away the shadows. We have medicalized death, turning it into a series of clinical stages and predictable declines. It happens behind closed doors in quiet rooms, managed by professionals. The Banshee tears down those doors. She is the antithesis of a quiet, managed death. She is the primal scream that announces the final, irreversible truth, a truth we spend our entire lives trying to forget. And this is where the story takes its most unsettling turn. Because the great families of Ireland, the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the Kavanaghs, and the O'Gradys, they didn't just stay in Ireland. Famine, poverty, and the promise of a new life drove them across the Atlantic. They came to America, building new homes in Boston, Chicago, New York, and beyond. They brought their culture, their faith, and their stories. And the question that has haunted generations of the Irish diaspora is a chilling one. Did the Banshee follow them? Did this ancient, territorial spirit, so deeply tied to the green hills and misty glens of Ireland, somehow remain tethered to the bloodline she was sworn to watch over? Stories persist, whispered in hushed tones, of experiences that defy easy explanation. A wail heard outside a suburban home in Pennsylvania, the night a beloved grandfather passed away unexpectedly in his sleep. A shrieking cry that seemed to come from the baby monitor in a Texas apartment, hours before a tragic call came from overseas. A group of cousins gathered for a barbecue in a California backyard, all hearing the same keening sob on the wind, only to learn the next morning that their matriarch, the keeper of the family's history, was gone. Skeptics, of course, have their explanations. Auditory pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to perceive familiar sounds in random noise. The hoot of an owl, the cry of a fox, the whine of truck brakes, all misinterpreted by a mind already primed for grief. Or perhaps the more clinical term, a grief hallucination. The immense psychological stress of anticipating or experiencing a loss can manifest in powerful sensory experiences. The mind, straining under an unbearable weight, might create the very thing it has been taught to expect. It hears the wail because the stories of its ancestors told it to listen, and this is a compelling argument. For many, it's a comforting one. It places the Banshee not in the windswept night, but inside the complex, grieving human brain. She becomes a symbol, a psychological artifact, rather than a supernatural entity. A coping mechanism in a way for the psyche to give voice to an unspeakable sorrow, to prepare itself for the coming void. But this explanation, as neat as it is, begins to fray at the edges when you look closer at the accounts. What about the stories where the cry is heard by multiple people at once, in different rooms, all describing the same sound? What about the cases where the wail precedes a death that is completely unexpected? A sudden accident, a heart attack in a person with no known health issues. In these instances, there is no period of anticipatory grief. There is no mind already straining under the knowledge of impending loss. There is only the shriek hanging in the still air, followed by the terrible news. How do we explain the wail that comes before anyone knows there is a reason to grieve? This is the enduring power and terror of the Banshee. She exists in that liminal space between folklore and lived experience, between psychology and the supernatural. To dismiss her entirely is to ignore the sheer volume of testimony, the sincerity of the witnesses, and the profound cultural weight she carries. To accept her is to accept that there are forces connected to our world, to our very blood, that operate outside the known laws of science. Perhaps we have been looking at her all wrong. We call her a harbinger of death, an omen of doom. We see her as a figure of terror. But what if that's a fundamental misunderstanding? What if her cry is not a curse, but a final sacred courtesy? In the old world, her wail was a signal to the community. It was a call to gather, to prepare, to begin the rituals of mourning. It gave the family time, Time to stop what they were doing, to travel to the bedside, to hold a hand one last time, to say the things that needed to be said. In a world of sudden, isolating deaths, the Banshee offers a transition. She provides a warning. She is not the cause of the death. She is not an executioner arriving to claim a soul. She is a messenger, performing a solemn, sorrowful duty bound to her by ancient pacts. She is the embodiment of the family's own collective grief, given a voice before they even know they need one. Her cry rips through the mundane fabric of everyday life and announces that something sacred is about to happen. It forces you to stop, to listen, and to remember your connection to something older and deeper than yourself. She is the ultimate expression of loyalty, a spirit who remains tied to a family through centuries of change, war, and migration, a guardian who watches over the threshold between life and death. Her appearance is a sign of legitimacy, a supernatural confirmation of a noble and ancient lineage. To have a Banshee was and is a mark of distinction. It means your family is old enough, important enough, to have its own personal herald of the underworld. It means your roots run so deep into the earth of the old country that they have attracted the attention of its oldest spirits. And so the legend of the Banshee endures, not just as a scary ghost story told around a campfire, but as a complex and profound piece of cultural identity. She is a reminder that death is not an end, but a passage. She is a testament to the unbreakable bonds of family, bonds that not even death or time, or the vastness of an ocean can sever. She represents the grief that is so immense, so soul-shattering, that it takes on a life of its own, screaming its pain into the fabric of the cosmos. Whether she is a spirit of the otherworld, a psychic echo, or a manifestation of the grieving human heart, her message remains the same. She forces us to confront our mortality, not with clinical detachment, but with raw, primal emotion. She reminds us that for every life, there is a death, and for every great family, there is a great sorrow that follows them through the ages. And so tonight, if the wind howls a little louder around the corners of your house, if a sound from the darkness makes the hair on your arms stand up, listen closely. Is it just the wind? Or is it something more? Is it a lament for a life that is about to pass from this world? The sound is said to be unmistakable. It is the grief of ages, the sorrow of 1,000 goodbyes, all woven into a single soul-shattering cry. And the most terrifying and perhaps the most profound part of the legend is this. If you hear her, she isn't crying for a stranger. She knows your name, and she is crying for one of your own.